I will present to you our work, Triangulation in Random Refractive Distortions. You can see an example of such distortions in this image. Please look at this movie. It was acquired underwater in the jacuzzi of Caltech, using an upward-looking underwater camera. You are familiar with this natural phenomenon of random distortions from the swimming pool or from the sea. Now, think of applying some computer vision tasks to this challenging video. What is the first thing you would want to do? The first thing that comes to mind is to undistort these images. However, it is difficult if there are moving objects in the scene, as you can see here. So, what else can we do? The subject of interest here is actually the person walking. This is interesting because it reveals activity. This movie is the result of an automatic discrimination between dynamic and static objects. The red dots are static and the green dots are dynamic. This is actually a difficult problem because nothing is static here. But there's good news, as there are off-the-shelf trackers that can handle it. Tracking enables us to study statistics, for example. This is our work on motion detection through water that was published this year in PAMI. These interest points are shown here in our motion variance feature space. The axes are variances in x and y directions. To separate dynamic from static points, we derived a physics-based classifier. This is this blue line here. You can see the details in our PAMI paper. So, we can also ask, where is the object of interest located? In this presentation, I will concentrate on localization. This scenario is related to biological vision. It exists in marine animals seeking to detect prey or avoid predators. The archerfish, for example, shoots down airborne prey using a water jet from below the surface. It has also been hypothesized that seals watch for ambushing polar bears prior to surfacing for air. In addition, there are birds and land animals, such as cormorants and penguins, that detect and hunt fish by looking down through the water surface. Upward vision through a water-air interface can function as a virtual periscope for submarines and divers who wish to avoid using attention-drawing physical periscopes. So, our task is to estimate an object's location, here the potato head, under random refractive distortions like in this example here. More specifically, we take a multi-view approach to this task. Both cameras are underwater looking up. Given two views of the object, our task is to estimate the location of the object using triangulation. In this presentation, I will show you how it is done. Now, let's look at some of the related work. Distortions and scene reconstruction through a flat water interface have been thoroughly studied. But in our scenario, there is a challenge of random dynamic distortions. There is also much work dealing with wavy water interface. There are video-based methods to flatten monocular images taken through a wavy water-air interface. These methods require a large number of frames and thus used for static scenes. There are multi-camera methods dedicated to recovering a wavy water-air interface. These methods, however, often rely on a known calibration target or a structured light. They are thus not intended to triangulate unknown objects behind a water-air interface. Dynamic distortions are also present when imaging through atmospheric turbulence. There are works on image undistortion, motion detection, and also triangulation. However, the distortions there are much weaker than in water-air interface. Now, let's dive into some details. When the water surface is flat, this point projects to this pixel. Let's call it x flat. When the water surface is wavy, the same point now projects to a different pixel. Let's call it x. Let's look at the wavy water surface as it varies with time. Pay attention to the surface point and its surface normal, which corresponds to the surface slope. Following Cox and Monk from 1954, the water-air interface normal n is random in space and time and has a Gaussian distribution. The variance of n depends on meteorological parameters. Therefore, in the image plane over time, the projection of the observed object fluctuates. Showing all the pixels where we have observed the object gives the following distribution. By averaging these positions, we obtain x flat. And the distribution of possible pixel positions is approximately normal around x flat. Red means high probability and blue low probability. This is the distribution of x given x flat. But x flat is unknown. So we have only x. We do not want to wait to collect statistics and average in order to get x flat. Therefore, we use Bayes' rule, which means that if we know the distribution of x around x flat, we know the distribution of x flat around x. The probability of x flat is constant, since there is no preference of imaging at x flat, meaning we can move the distribution to be around x. And this is the distribution of x flat given x. In conclusion, this means that given a distorted pixel x, we can say that the flat pixel is somewhere in the vicinity of x with this distribution. Now, this is our image plane. We have only the pixel x. If I knew the water surface, I would back project. But I don't know the water surface, so I do something that is probabilistic. Given the pixel x, we know that the flat pixel is nearby with this probability. Let's back project all the pixels around x with matching weights. We replace the unknown wavy water surface with a flat surface. Now there is refraction, and therefore, then this cone represents the position likelihood of the object imaged at x. How do we narrow the support of this likelihood? To narrow the support, we need additional measurements so that we could multiply the likelihoods. Thus, we need these measurements to be uncorrelated. One way to obtain uncorrelated measurements is to wait to collect temporal statistics. Another efficient way is to introduce additional views. The byproduct of multiple views is actually triangulation. What about correlation between views? Correlation between water wave slopes at two different surface points depends on the lateral distance between them. This corresponds to the distance between views, the baseline. If the baseline is significantly shorter than the typical water slope correlation length, then distortions in the two views are mutually highly correlated, as illustrated here. Notice that both cameras view through the same wave slope. However, we prefer to work in another domain, where distortions across views are uncorrelated. Beyond a certain distance, we can assume that there is no correlation between the water slopes, so we prefer a wider baseline. You can see this here in the submarine illustration. Both cameras view through significantly different shapes of the water surface. This means that any new view adds more information about the object location. Now let's look at this example. Look at these 2 points tracked over time. Notice that both points are correlated. We wanted to verify that there is a low correlation across views. This is our setup in the lab. These are the cameras. Our baseline is 27.5 centimeters. Now, observe both views simultaneously. You cannot see any correlation between the trajectories across views. The average correlation coefficient between views was about 0.14. This result points to low correlation between views. Between consecutive frames, the correlation coefficient was around 0.6. Multiple views offer less correlated data significantly faster than sequential monocular imaging. This strongly supports the use of multi-view imaging, irrespective of triangulation, even if we only want to know the direction of distant objects or to undistort object locations. There are motivations to study vision in multi-view settings. For example, do you remember the birds? Birds fly in search of fish. And the fish? Fish swim in search of airborne flies. In all cases, predators need to assess the 3D location of the prey prior to charging. Maybe this is done by triangulation, as the predator changes its position mid-motion, thus obtaining multi-views. A multi-view virtual periscope can help submarines locate objects above water without using physical periscopes that will reveal their presence. In order to triangulate, we use stereo. So, there is a pair of submerged cameras looking upward through the water surface. When the water surface is flat, this object point is imaged at x flat at both views. In this work, we assume that the correspondence is known. Wavy water causes the same object point to be imaged at two different pixels at the left and right views. Recall that x flat is not known. But we know that x flat is somewhere around the distorted pixel x, based on wave statistics. By back projecting from both views through the flat surface, we obtain the possible region for object 3D location at the intersection. Since we have a distribution around x, we actually obtain a likelihood function in 3D. The estimated location is the location of the maximum likelihood. Now, we received another pair of frames with different wavy surface. Again, by back projecting in a similar way through the flat surface, we obtain another region, and the possible object location is at the intersection of both frames. This region is narrower. Again, the estimated location is at the maximum likelihood. Additional frames will narrow this uncertainty. What happens if the object is moving? We cannot wait for more temporal frames. You can see here that using more views narrows the uncertainty without additional temporal frames. This is good because we can obtain a more accurate estimation in less time, meaning that this approach can be generalized for moving objects. We tested our method both in the lab and in the swimming pool. Our experimental setup included 2 video cameras in waterproof housings, as you can see over here. Now I'll show you some results. This scene was captured in a swimming pool using 2 video cameras. These are the input frames. What you see here is the estimated 3D location of the green object point. The ellipsoids around the estimation are the uncertainty regions, which are the effective support of the obtained likelihood function. Notice that uncertainty shrinks with time. Here you can see another example of 2 brooms. This one is closer to the cameras than the other. Now, a few words about limitations. As you can see in this sketch, for a regular stereo system, as a result of pixel discretization, a range estimation error occurs. Notice that the uncertainty in depth estimation grows with range. The diamonds get bigger as we go further away from the cameras. Each such slot represents many pixels. Thus, we have the same limitation, only with a different scaling. To sum up, in this work, we proposed an approach for triangulation in highly random refractive distortions. We proposed a multi-view approach and a stochastic formulation. By using more viewpoints, the method can be generalized to moving objects.